So I'm going to take the beginning of this presentation and you're going to give me a moment, please. Thank you all. It's a pleasure being here. I'm going to take a moment to find a screen share for you. We titled this presentation, Understanding Yishuv Shel Olam. I noticed that in the publicity information, it was called Understanding Yishuv ha-Olam. That may well be our doing. Yishuv ha-Olam and Yishuvo Shel Olam are grammatically equivalent phrases in Hebrew. Those know Hebrew grammar have probably bumped into that phenomenon. And the texts that refer to the concept use both terms. In our presentation today, we've used Yishuv Shel Olam and tried to standardize, but you will bump into both. The concept of Yishuv Shel Olam means the establishment. It's from Yashav, to sit, the settlement of the world. And it refers broadly to the creation of creation and its peopling and its stability. And this concept, Yishuv Shel Olam, is probably the greatest concept that you've never heard of, because we had never heard of it really before we began the research that we did. This we are calling the mitzvah of Yishuv Shel Olam is not in the best known list of mitzvot, that list of mitzvot by Maimonides. But in his introduction to his list, Maimonides explains that mitzvot are granular. They're specific actions that you can take, and he's not going to include broad principles that are animating mitzvot. The first of his mitzvot is procreation in the beginning of Genesis. Not procreation. Maimonides lists the first of the mitzvot. He has the mitzvot in logical order. His first mitzvah is belief in God. The second best known list of mitzvot is the list by Sefer HaChinuch. Sefer HaChinuch, by the name of Pinchas ben Aharon HaKohen, was an itinerant preacher in Spain in the 13th century. It's an interesting sort of a position, itinerant preacher. He was a homiletics guy who traveled from congregation to congregation teaching Torah. Sefer HaChinuch also does not have Yishuv Shel Olam in its mitzvah list, because his list is not, or his list of mitzvot is of granular mitzvot, specific mitzvot. And Yishuv Shel Olam is a core concept. But his description of the very first mitzvah that you bump into in the Torah, which is procreation, and he lists them in Torah order, is this. The Parsha of Bereshit has one mitzvah. Among the roots of this mitzvah is that the world should be inhabited. For God wishes the world to be inhabited. As it says, God did not create it to be chaos. He fashioned it to be habitable. This is a great mitzvah, talking about Yishuv Shel Olam. That's the word habitable, lashevet. It is a great mitzvah on account of which all other mitzvot in the world exist. Hear that again. It is a great mitzvah on account of which all other mitzvot in the world exist. So perhaps you haven't seen the term Yishuv Shel Olam as a specified mitzvah. It is completely broad-based. And in fact, Sefer HaChinuch, having introduced it in the first mitzvah, applies it throughout his count of 613 mitzvot. So when he gets to the 10 commandments, he explains that murder, adultery, theft, false testimony, the first commandments of the second tablet are all of them, and each of them based on the need to have a stable world. That's why these are prohibited, because of Yishuv Shel Olam. Interesting, when we come to the prohibition on sorcery, he writes, God wishes the world to be established and function solely by the laws of nature. The requirement of Yishuv Shel Olam includes truth and science. Does this sound significant? The requirement to come to the aid of someone who is pursued, he says Yishuv Shel Olam is furthered by saving the weak. That too is on account of Yishuv Shel Olam. This was not a 13th century idea of Sefer HaChinuch. In fact, he drew this, that assuring the ability for life to thrive in this world is a foundational mitzvah of Judaism. He drew this from one of the earliest Mishnahs, Mishnayot, technically in Hebrew, one of the earliest on record. This is a Mishnah in Eduyot. Eduyot is spoken of by many scholars as the very first tractate of the Mishnah. It collects a series of very old traditions. This tradition is in the name of the schools of Hillel and Shammai, so it dates back to the beginning of the 1st century while the temple was still standing. And this is where Chinuch gets his idea that Yishuv Shel Olam is at the heart of the mitzvah of procreation. Lo, says the Mishnah, the world was not created except for procreation. As it says, God did not create it to be chaos. God fashioned it to be habitable. And if you note in this Mishnah, it's an afterthought. The rule that the Mishnah is telling is a different one. It says, this rule is the case because God, of course, God created the world to be habitable. So this is an idea that dates back to the very earliest that we have of rabbinic Jewish culture. And indeed, the verse is Isaiah. It seems to date back even to the biblical period. Rashi explains God did not create it to be chaos. We should occupy ourselves with the establishment of the world. In a sense, that's humanity's mission. Tosfot, the subsequent generations after Rashi, asked the clever question about the Mishnah. The Mishnah says you have to have procreation, and it quotes Isaiah. Why didn't it cite the verse about procreation? It's better, it's more powerful to cite Torah over citing the prophets. And there's a specific verse about this specific mitzvah. Why cite Isaiah and the concept of Yishuv Shel Olam? And Tosfot answers, this mitzvah is more powerful than Pruah Revu. It's true that Pruah Revu is a biblical precept, but this is more fundamental. It's more important. And Yishuv Shel Olam was not spoken of only in terms of procreation, that's human and animal procreation. It was a concept used also to describe the very basic structure of the universe, the cycle of watering the earth, of fruitfulness, of plants growing. And you see that in this text. Pour down, O skies from above. I, the Lord, have created it. The midrash to that verse, the verse is also, by the way, from Isaiah in the same chapter as the establishment of the world verse. Pour down, O skies, that refers to the rain. The Lord created it. Well, that's why I created the world. This is the purpose of creation. L'tikuno u'l'yishuvo shel olam, for the founding and for the establishment of the world. And I want you to notice that that concept of tikkun olam that we all are so familiar with is seen as hand in glove with, as part and parcel of Yishuvo shel olam. I mean, one could almost argue that Yishuvo shel olam is the broader concept that starts from the very founding of the earth, and as long as it continues, it should be stable and maintainable. And tikkun shel olam, tikkun means repair, so tikkun shel olam is about fixing where Yishuvo shel olam actions have begun to run off the rails. So Yishuvo shel olam here is an overarching concept. It's call it a foundational mitzvah, that we have to make the world habitable in this generation and the next. And you see that again in this text by Abravanel in the 15th century. Abravanel is talking about that mitzvah that says you can't destroy a bird and its eggs in the nest, same in one action. You can take the eggs if you need them as part of your sustenance, but you have to spare the mother. The Torah intended to avoid the death of the mother so that existence should continue. And then he compares that to another mitzvah, the mitzvah of bal tashchit, of not destroying a fruit tree in a siege. That too is one of the primary environmental texts of the Torah. It's the lo ta'aseh, it's the negative commandment tied to Yishuv ha-Olam, that you shouldn't, you need to establish the world and maintain it, and you shouldn't destroy. That is why he writes, the end of the verse is, so that it may be good for you and you live long upon the earth. It is good for humankind that existence be sustained so that they may be nourished by existence, by the world for years to come. So this is directly the sustainability charge, that we have to maintain the continuity, the ability of the world to continue. That's the mitzvah of Yishuvo shel olam, of procreation, of social justice, of not just bal tashchit, not destroying the fruit tree. This is a grand call for continuity. Sorry, you see it again in this citation from a late medieval source. The essence of the mitzvah, to leave a blessing after yourself, the perpetuation of the species so that the world remains forever. And thus, says this author using another one of the big terms, Yishuvo shel olam, tikkuno shel olam, becoming a partner in the works of creation. That is what this process is. This is a grand founding call in the Torah, the sustainability of the earth for humanity, for all manner of life, today and tomorrow, and it comes with a cautionary note. Just as humanity can sustain the world and be partners of the Lord in creation so we can destroy it. And here, this text is a little Kabbalistically informed. Says the righteous can be known by their actions. The ones who improve the world, those are the righteous. The wicked destroy its order and return it to tohu. Back to Isaiah, God wants lashevet. He doesn't want tohu. The wicked are those who return the world to tohu, and by doing that, lessen the bounty of the world. And his reference here to the bounty of the world, that's you employing a Kabbalistic concept that God is like an overflowing fountain whose grace and benefit is just flowing down to the earth. That's the shefa ha-Olam that he is speaking about. If we allow our actions to return the world to chaos, we are going to turn off the divine spigot, as it were, that is flowing grace and life upon the earth. So now I'm going to stop my share and hand this back to my wife. Oh, we should take questions at this point. Are there any questions that?
Could you say again what Yishuv shel Olam means?
It's really difficult to translate with one term. Yashav means to sit. Yishuv shel Olam means the sitting of the earth, right? That's sitting upon the earth. It is used about the foundation of the earth's systems. It is used about the foundation of society. It is used about maintaining social justice. All of those fall in categories under Yishuv ha-Olam. It's used about to justify having a judicial justice system because we have to maintain Yishuv shel Olam.
So I'm very curious, as you mentioned, there's this foundational principle, and until I heard about this presentation, I'd never heard it. I mean, I've been listening to, Devar Torah and studies and everything. How is it that this gets missed, do you think?
Well, so that's what I said at the beginning. It's not on anyone's list of mitzvot. Because it's not on anyone's list of mitzvot, somehow we have missed articulating this principle. And it is, in fact, a lot of what we're hoping to do is to get this concept into the world, because I think this is the Jewish concept of sustainability.
I mean, it's very interesting because, like, I know Orthodox people and they don't want to hear about science. They don't want to hear about environmentalism, and they're not, like, if you put this from a Jewish perspective, how do you do anything else?
A good question.
Other questions?
I'm just wondering, how did you get it on your list of mitzvot? Because it doesn't sound like it doesn't sound like it was an obvious. It sounds like it was fun. I'm wondering, was it wanting to find something, like going one direction of finding the mitzvah, or another direction of what does Judaism have to say about this, or how did it become because it wasn't on anybody else's list?
Well, so in fact, this is a little bit of a critique of the Jewish environmental writings. We found ourselves not moved by, a lot of people use Bal Tashchit, and I mentioned that Bal Tashchit was the negative mitzvah associated with Yishuv shel Olam.
Bal Tashchit meaning, of course, that you shall not wantonly destroy, right?
Thank you. And others just spoke sort of broadly about this is God's earth, and Shemitah comes into that, because part of the message of Shemitah is that this is God's earth, that it's not ours. But we felt that something else was wanted, and I don't remember exactly sort of what sort of set this off, but between the Mishnah and Chinuch, you looked at the base texts that started the search for just how piercing, fundamental is this concept.
Yeah, I'll just add one more thing. Avram and I were asked by the Rabbinical Assembly and the Committee on Jewish Law and Standards about 2.5 years ago to write a tshuva, to write a judicial opinion on sustainability. And we struggled for about 6 months trying to figure out how do we organize it. We did approach it with granular issues, categorical issues, energy, transportation, food, waste, right, that sort of thing. But it seemed that there was something missing, that there was, what stitched all of that together? Did Judaism only have the granular mitzvah, which is the way Judaism talks, right? That's Rambam's mitzvahs and the Shulchan Aruch, I mean, the mitzvahs tell us in a sense what to do. They don't give you a broad philosophical frame, a fundamental, they don't express the values behind them. And we thought, but there has to be somewhere in the grand literature of Judaism, something that serves as the fundamental frame that could guide and shape our environmental and sustainability ethic. So we went looking for it, and it was Avram's creative genius in looking at texts that came up with it. And the more we looked, the more we saw it was there.
It's really amazing, you guys. It's very beautiful. I'm trying to do this writing and this research, and one of the directions that I have started to come, and of course it's having read yours and many other works on this subject, is the idea that that we're told to do the things that will allow us to belong on the land, to honor your father, all of these things that will enable us to live long on the land are the positive mitzvot, and the negative mitzvot are the ones that threaten us with exile, environmental destruction. The sky will be like iron, and the earth will be like bronze. Like, all of those are the things that follow from the negative mitzvot. So, I'm actually planning to undertake a project of really looking for all of the places where we're given this guidance, these are the things that will perpetuate you upon the land, and these are the things that will cause the earth to shrink up and repulse you, right? And the Shemitah is this essential kind of a keystone of this process, because the Shemitah is actually, it's both a promise and it's a threat at the same time. The promise is, if you do these things, then basically you win the game. It's like you win the game of life, because you will bring God down and God will walk about in your midst, just like in the Garden of Eden. Whereas if you don't do these things, these waves upon waves of devastating events will happen, escalating for the amount of time that you reject the good advice. And then in order for the earth to recover from it, it's going to require Shemitah years equivalent to the Shemitah years that were neglected, in order to recover and for the promise to be transmitted again across time. So it's just it seems like this is a very fundamental place that we're in, and I'm so grateful to have become aware of your work at this time.
Yeah, and I'm very appreciative of what you're saying. I'm still wondering, and maybe with your work you'll help me figure this out. I'm still wondering if, in a sense, Shemitah is a encapsulation of the mitzvah of Yishuv ha-Olam, because Shemitah embodies ethics of social justice, right? You have to be you have, everybody should be equal at some point, right? You the landowner don't own land anymore. Everybody has an equal relationship to the land. Everybody has equal access to the resources of the land. So it's social justice, it's environmental justice. You have to be good to the land, as you were saying. It's about economic justice, right? You have to forgive debt so that people should have economic sort of ease so that they can rebuild themselves. So there's a sense of that economic, social, environmental, health, all together equal a sustainable world, equal a Yishuv ha-Olam. And I'm just
I
wondering.
just want to add that in the slide of the other places where Sefer HaChinuch pulls up Yishuv ha-Olam, economic oppression is one of those, lo tonu, because that is part of the triad.
Right, and the way that I frame it is exploitation. We're just not allowed. We're not allowed to exploit the land, and we're not allowed to exploit one another. And that's sort of like the key thing that that is similar among the people being exploited for their interest on their loans versus and the land being exploited to constantly produce more and more when it needs to rest. I look at that key of exploitation versus the intention being that it's supposed to be nurturing and sustaining and generous, and that's the way the land is intended by God as in order to provide sustenance. And when we use it in an exploitative way and we diminish its ability to do that, then we're at odds. We're like at loggerheads with the intention.
Right, and I think modernity puts into silos economic health, environmental health, social health, political health, civil peace, and it's all of a piece. It's all, and we are realizing that now. It's all of a piece, and I think Yishuv ha-Olam reminds us of that. It's not just about our relationship to the earth; it's also our relationship to each other. It's about civilization and it's about nature. It's a whole ecosystem with people, yes, very much at the center, but not able to destroy the rest of nature for the purposes. It's not anthropocentric in the sense of values. It is just that we happen to be the most capable of beings, and we're the ones who are the storytellers. And so we can tell the stories. Thomas Berry, who was a famous Catholic theologian, said two things that I just stick with me whenever I think of environmental issues and teachings. He said, first of all, one thing is every generation has a great work to which they are called. And our great work today, first and foremost, that no other generation, no other society ever had, is to protect the earth. Because we are, as E.O. Wilson said, a geophysical force. And we are the first generation that has the capacity to destroy the operating system of the earth. So, so that we have this capacity and we have to take it seriously. That's what Avram's last slide was saying. We have this capacity, and if we don't use it well, we can end up destroying not just a river or a small ecosystem, but in fact the global operating system. So that's one thing he said. Another thing that he said was, we are, as far as we know, we're the only conscious life in the universe, and it is our task to be aware of the glories of the universe. It is our task to be aware of nature. It's like they said in the movie Contact, if there's no other life out there, it's a terrible waste of space. Well, in a sense, can you imagine a whole universe where nobody was aware of its glory, where nobody was aware that it existed? We are, as far as we know, the only ones who are aware of the majesty of creation. And we have to celebrate that. And part of the celebration is preserving it.
And the Psalms teach us that all of the creatures, that all of the animals are aware of it too, that they are also singing this praise to God, right? In their own language, the ocean and the wild creatures. But it's life. It's like the living creatures. Like it's all of it. We like, how can we destroy something that's in the middle of praising God, itself? It's just, it's heartbreaking to think of some of the things that we're engaged in right now. And this language is so compelling, and I think that we all feel it. It immediately resonates.
Could I, this is Sandra, and I'm just so thrilled to hear the work that you've been doing. And I just want to push it a little bit further, or at least ask you whether this resonates with you. And that is that just riffing off the last thing, Nina, that you said about the gloriousness, the glory of the universe. And that is to talk about beauty. And that's something I've been writing on, the importance of beauty in the conversation of sustainability. And I've written a little bit about Hidur ha-Mitzvah, trying to look for a way within the tradition that the tradition talks about beauty, because I think it's not sufficient to talk about habitability. But underneath that notion of habitability is the assumption that it is habitable as that it is a beautiful world that we're inhabiting. And yet we hardly talk about beauty either. I mean, I really do think we need to begin to develop theologies of beauty because it's an assumption that's built into the tradition. And yet for all kinds of historical and philosophical reasons, we have not expanded on that assumption to our diminishment. And we now know that the destruction of the environment is the destruction of great beauty. And so I'd like to just hear your thoughts on pushing it a bit further beyond the notion of simple habitability. And of course, that is kind of a baseline for sustainability, but it's beyond that. I mean, our intention is to thrive and not simply to survive.
Absolutely. The Yishuv ha-Olam is about thriving and not just surviving. And I think for 10 years now that I've been using the word sustainability, every time I use it, I say it's insufficient. I mean, it's just somehow, it's not just surviving, or it's not just sustaining. It is in fact thriving. You throw out a wonderful challenge, which Avram and I are going to have to take up more deeply than we have in the past. The rabbis are not real good at talking about beauty so much. I mean, you look at Psalm 104 and, oh my gosh, you've just got the celebration of the glorious beauty, of the world. So it's not like it's not in Tanakh. It's certainly in the Bible. The rabbis were not as sensitive to that on a main level, unless Avram, you can think of ways to contradict what I'm saying right now. But there are strands of beauty in our tradition, and one of our charges, as there's a charge for each and every generation, is to take Judaism and to advance it, right? To advance the thinking and the texts and the values that as they're expressed in Judaism. So I think you're identifying another area that we have to pursue. And I'll say one more thing. I might never get to teach my part of this, but that's okay. We have a good conversation anyway. So I am working to see if we can get in the Maryland State Constitution in our Declaration of Rights, which is our Bill of Rights, an amendment which says that everyone has a right to a healthful environment. But it doesn't just say that. It uses the words historic, scenic, and aesthetic, because those are also precious elements of the environment. And I will tell you that we had to strike the word aesthetic in order to even get this talked about. We might have to strike the word scenic. I hope we don't have to strike the word historic, because we can schlep some of the beauty, in with that word. But you're absolutely right, Sandra. It's just not part of the equation. And I understand it is difficult to assess what is an appropriate aesthetic and what isn't, what has to give way for what I call creative destruction, for development and progress, because we are all living in the midst of destruction, right? Our books are made by trees that were, cut down. Our homes are made by trees that were cut down. Our homes were made by land that was dug up by steel and mud and marble. So there is destruction in the world, but it has to be for creative, it has to be for creation and not negative, and it has to be sustainable. It has to be able to be used in a way that generation after generation can also benefit from the world as we have benefited from the world, which is a long way to say, thank you for that challenge.
Great. Well, thank you. I think just quickly, I think the rabbis assumed beauty. I think they assumed that the world was beautiful. and so that it didn't need to be discussed. I mean, I think there's a number of things going on, but I'm so glad you're going to take it up. Thanks.
Thanks for that point.
Why don't you, yeah, if you, I'd love for you to hear what you wanted to teach, Nina. Sorry about that.
I don't quite have enough time, but I'll see what I can do to at least whet your appetites. Okay, let me share my screen. So, okay, you all, whoops, let me do it in my, where are we? Where's the start slideshow there? Play from start. All righty, so, oh, I'm at the very beginning when I don't want to be. Hang on a second, guys. Oops, let me get to where I need to be. So sorry about that. It's a quick run through in case you need refreshing. Okay, so once we establish the fact that Yishuv shel Olam, this essential element of us being part of a habitable world and making the world more habitable, because we are, after all, partners with God. The question is, how do we achieve habitability? What is it that we do? And that's what Judaism always wants to know. You know, it's not, we don't live in grand values alone. We have to figure out what we have to do. And there are two modes that Judaism in the books of Genesis, in the first two chapters, describes as the ways of achieving habitability. Genesis 1, I want to propose, has the survivability model. That is, as you can see here, it says, and God said, let us make Adam, that is the human being, in our image after our likeness. And they, this male and female, Adam, human being, shall rule the fish of the sea and the birds of the sky and the cattle and the whole earth and all creeping things that creep on the earth. So this, it seems to me, reflects the fear of early, of vulnerable societies, and certainly the author of the text is projecting this onto the first human beings. Here we are, as it were, naked in a foreign world, in a world of wilderness, in a world in which disease and cold and heat and drought and floods and animals could harm us. And one of the first things that we need to do to survive is to manage and in fact, in some ways, control our environment around us. I would bet we are all sitting inside our homes right now with our thermostats in our clothes, with refrigerators full. I mean, the first thing that we need for survivability, the first thing that we want for survivability is the ability to control our environment. It is a way of placing our capacity for domination on top of the environment, because that's where we feel secure in when we are most vulnerable. The assumptions of this Genesis 1 survivability model of Yishuv shel Olam are that that humanity is vulnerable, that we are small, right? Our footprint is small, the world is large, that dominance, in fact, was a blessing. And that's the way Genesis 1 offers it. Human beings, here you are in a preset world, and we'll talk about a little bit more what that is, in a preset world with everything present, all the good, but also all the dangers and all the bad. And what you need to do is somehow manage it, get control of it, so that you can live lives of dignity. You can build shelter. You can create clothing. You can hunt and forage and get food for yourself. Not hunting, actually, in Genesis 1. Let me just clarify that. You could, because we weren't allowed to eat the animals, but we could forage, right? And the overriding that was a sense that we could not harm the earth. The earth was there, it was regenerative, it was full, it was big, we were small. And what we wanted and what we felt we needed in such a situation is to be able to manage, and dominate is a hard word, but in some measure, I think that Genesis 1 is being honest in some of the human impulses. Imagine if you were thrust into a desert somewhere, or if you were thrust into a jungle all by yourself, no tools, no history, no phone, no GPS, no cultural history, right? No prior knowledge. You want to get a handle on everything that's happening, and you want to be able to manipulate it so that the first thing you can do is make sure that you can wake up tomorrow morning, and survive. So that's the Genesis 1 model. That's the survivability model. And that, by the way, I think has been the model of the human psyche for much of human history, But as we know, that psyche is also what has gotten us into the situation that we are in today, because we're no longer the same, have the same vulnerability as we had in the past. We still have great vulnerability, as COVID is showing us, but we don't have the same vulnerability as we had in the past. Our footprint is no longer small. The world is much smaller. We are big, the world is smaller. Dominance, like cutting mountaintops off, clear cutting forests, tilling the Great Plains, that sort of dominance, that's not a blessing anymore. That's destructive. And we know, because we are so many of us with such technology across the globe, that we can harm the earth. So that model is beneficial in some cases in the history. We understand why it was. Maybe even in some cases today, Avram suggests that maybe COVID allows us to understand why we wanted and sometimes still need a Genesis 1 model, right? This is about how humanity survives, but that's not a sufficient model for us to go forward with. We will destroy the world if we continue with the Genesis 1 model. So what's this another model of sustainability? Conveniently, it's in Genesis 2, radically different, right? When the Lord God made heaven and earth, when no shrub of the field was yet on earth, and no grasses of the field had yet sprouted, because the Lord God had not sent rain upon the earth, and there was no Adam, that same word, there was no human to tend or work or serve the soil. This creation is absolutely opposite of creation 1. Creation 1, God made the world in 6 days to the fullness. It was self-regenerative, and all the trees and the plants had seeds in them to make more seeds. Humans were very small. We were the end. We were there and put there to enjoy all of creation as it had already been formed. Genesis 2 says, you know what? There was no shrub. There was no greenery. There wasn't even the proper watering. The earth was barren because it needed 2 things. It needed rain and it needed humanity. So what did God do? God brought in the waters, those 4 rivers, from Eden. And God made an Adam, made a human being, and placed him in the garden, L'avda o l'shamra, to work it, to serve it, right? L'avda is the same verb as service in the temple cult, right? We are there, L'avda, to work it, also to serve it, l'shamra, that is to tend it and to preserve it, right? To serve it and to preserve it. That this is what humanity is meant to do. The earth is not regenerative by itself. The earth needs our assistance. We are a power that affects the health and the verdancy of the earth. And Genesis 2 is about sustainability, not just survivability. Genesis 2 is about systems. So Genesis 2 assumptions, humanity is part of a larger natural system. Humanity is a geophysical force, and hence humanity can alter the Earth's operating systems. And if we tamper with it, we have to be very certain that we're doing it in a way that mimics the 4 billion years of creation and the wisdom of the 4 billion years of creation, and not try to fight that. Because if we do, we will end up destroying things we do not yet understand. And humanity's purpose in this Genesis 2 sustainability model of habitability of Yishuv ha-Olam, our purpose is to engage with the world to make Earth and its inhabitants flourish. So Sandra, this is where it's not just surviving, right? But it is a matter of flourishing. So let me quickly take a couple more minutes to talk about the comparison of the two, and then where it took Avram and me in our tshuva. So Genesis 1 is about the world being wilderness, and so human having to be sovereign. And we understand that from that perspective, especially for, 10,000 years, 200,000 years of human existence, that we lived in a world that was wilderness, and we wanted to make sure we managed it well for our own survivability and for the creation of a civilization that afforded us dignity. But in Genesis 2, the world is garden. It needs our input. We are gardener. I just love that word. Every time I see it, I made it up, but it helps me understand that we are two things. We are there to manage the world and garden it as we want, right? And grow the things that earth can bring forth and that give us pleasure. But we are also the guards of that. We must make sure that we protect the earth in everything that we do. Genesis 1, earth is self-renewing. We don't have to worry about it. And I think that's what happened for most of human history. We felt that the earth could take care of itself, and it could because we were small and our footprint was small and earth was so large. And even if we defiled a certain area of the globe, the globe was so big, there was more that could support us, and we could leave that part of the earth to be self-renewing. But we know now that the earth will not be self-renewing if we continue to do what we do. The earth will require our inputs, and often our inputs mean that we have to work with the world in the way that the world has come to function after these 4 billion years of evolution. We have to do what the scientists call biomimicry. We have to work with the world so that it can regenerate itself. Genesis 1 puts humanity in the center. Right? Everything is for humanity and serves us. And Genesis 2 shows that, in fact, it is not anthropocentric world that we live in. It is a biocentric world, that we are made for the earth and not just the earth made for humanity. We are here as part of this grand mystery of life. And we have such power that we really have to participate as a contributor to it, and understand that the earth at this stage of the game, given our huge footprint, needs to have us be part of the biocentric approach and not an anthropocentric approach. Human relationship to the earth in Genesis 1 was extractive. We know how devastating that is. The human relationship to the earth in Genesis 2 was generative. We must give back. I just saw a wonderful documentary on soil and the ability to, in fact, create an agricultural system that doesn't deplete the soil and all the degradation that comes with the soil that is depleted, but that in fact, in the process of creating food for the billions of people on this earth, we can at the same time regenerate the health of the soil. This is what we need to do. And just that bottom line, just so I can finish this up and move on. In Genesis 1, we focus on personal vulnerability. It's not just anthropocentric, it's more like me-centric as well. And in Genesis 2, we have to focus on the system vulnerability. I can end up doing things for myself that protect myself that actually harm the system in Genesis 1. And in Genesis 2, I can only do those things that benefit myself if they also benefit the system, because otherwise we will all sink. These two approaches, which define, it seems to me, what Torah and Judaism say are models for how we live out this calling for Yishuv Shel Olam, are instructive. Genesis 1 was appropriate for a long time, and might be appropriate, again, as Avram taught me about, maybe about COVID, where we have to focus on preserving humanity, even at the expense of a virus. But Genesis 2 model is where we are now. The preponderance of what we need to do is care for the earth and look at systems, because if we don't do that, our personal self-interest is going to destroy us. We have to go beyond our personal self-interest. So let me go. I'm going to scooch toward the very end. There's a whole lot more there. But what this took us to was a way to try to understand categorically, how do we help our movement understand sustainability and the call to live as a part of the community of nature and not see nature as a commodity, to live in the world so it's not about me and my personal survivability, but it is about us and the communal survivability and thriving. And so what we did was we created not the granular little pieces of law, which would say, do you use cloth diapers or, or disposable diapers? Do you wash by hand or or put it in the dishwasher? What kind of car do you have to buy? Every situation is different. We couldn't make law for all conservative synagogues or for all families, but what we could do is guide them in 6 categories. 1, respond with urgency. We're out of time. Everybody knows that now. We're out of time. 2, inform ourselves about sustainability issues. And since we can't all do it, by the way, at least designate people. You'll see later on, we say, designate somebody to be sort of the sustainability guru who can guide us. But at least we should be informed of some of the fundamentals about consumption and what we should buy and how we should not throw things away and how we might need to recycle and compost, but just basic ways of living our lives, how we use our electricity, what electricity we purchase. Talk with family, friends, colleagues, and coworkers. As a friend of mine said recently, if you're silent, people are going to think you're happy. If you don't talk about it, it doesn't exist. President Trump struck the words climate change, greenhouse gas emissions, all that from the federal websites, so it doesn't exist. President Biden is putting them back in. We have to name these things. We have to talk about them. Otherwise, either it doesn't exist or we're happy with the way things are. And the more people hear we talking about it, the more it becomes part of their worldview of what they need to do as well. As much as possible, we should make our decisions align with the goals of sustainability, which means we have to understand what those goals are. We have to set goals for ourselves, our community, our congregation, set goals of sustainability, and then start marching toward them so you can meet them. If you don't have goals, you don't know, right? What do they say? If you don't know where you're going, you'll end up anywhere. I mean, we don't want to end up anywhere. We want to know where we're going, and then we want to set processes to get there. And someone's got to hold this portfolio, because if no one's holding a portfolio, it will diminish. We don't have a budget without somebody holding a financial portfolio in our institutions, because otherwise the money will just be frittered away. Just like that, we need somebody to hold the sustainability portfolio. We have to designate somebody in our institutions to do that. They should be on a board, whether it's professional or it's lay. They've got to be visible, and they've got to help us make decisions and hold our feet to the fire. And because we can't do it ourselves, and we can't even alone, and we can't even do it institutionally and complete the task must be added, which is advocacy. That is, we have to be involved, institutionally we have to be involved, and then on a public policy level we have to be involved. And we should advocate for sustainable practices in business, in government, and just sustainable practices, so that those people who have been most disproportionately affected by environmental degradation, those people who are going to be most disproportionately affected by the transitions from old technologies to new technologies, will be protected. So that's the call that we put out to the community. That's the call that we put out to you. And I am 1 minute over 2:00.